Well, good Monday morning, and thank you for joining us here for Live Impact News. My name is Eugene Daniel, joined in studio by producer Sarah Calloway and that man right there, meteorologist Craig Muller, who was just happened to take a nice look behind him as we're looking at the Virginia Beach oceanfront. Craig, you noticed some dots out there. You think those are surfers.
I thought we had a few surfers out there. I'm looking at it again. Maybe not. I mean, it looked like I saw a few like little heads out there. It's from far away on this particular view, and I'm thinking maybe not. It looked like there were a couple earlier, but I'm not seeing anything else out here. And normally I see them kind of bobbing around. Not a good day to be in the water, by the way, but if you're a surfer and you live for some swell, you've got a little bit of it out there right now.
And you know what? That's what I was thinking. Let's talk about it. Sarah, you have this pulled up right now. It is kind of like a dreary, wet kind of morning. Craig, you were talking about not the best day maybe to surf, but there are some waves out there, so that means we are experiencing at least a bit of that wind.
Yeah, there's actually a gale warning for the waters east of Virginia Beach right now, and a small craft advisory for the ocean. So what you're seeing, a pretty strong north wind, that's going to push, the waves down a little bit, and they are crashing behind me right now. So not a good day to be in the water, but I've seen surfers out in all kinds of crazy conditions. And again, right now, it's not looking like I thought I saw a few heads bobbing around out there, some folks trying to catch a wave or two, but this is kind of what you call a washing machine where the waves start to kind of collapse on each other. So it's not well organized. If you had this kind of wave action with the southwest wind, it would clean up the faces and it would be amazing. I would then guarantee there'll be a ton of people out there, but right now not looking like it. Hey, wanted to talk to you guys about the weather and the warm up that we've had. Have you noticed it?
Man, let me tell you something. Valentine's Day was absolutely phenomenal. It was so nice. You told us it was going to be nice, so hopefully people made their plans accordingly. And then the next day, we had all of that rain. So it was, let's go out and then let's cuddle. I don't know. That was my thought process.
The man's got a plan. Let's go out. Let's cuddle.
Listen to your local Mets. They'll help you out.
We had 59 for a high on Valentine's Day. It was beautiful. A lot of sunshine out there. Great start to the weekend. But you knew, if you watched us last week, we said, hey, Sunday we're going to deal with wet weather, and we sure did. We picked up 1.13 inches of rain at the airport. We are now exactly 2 inches, at least through midnight, 2 inches below normal for the year, the calendar year so far. I know 2026 is a baby still here, just the second month into it, but we are 2 inches below average. As we go over the coming 9 hours, we're going to see cloudy skies for a while. Pretty much the rain is gone, but it's still a little misty out there, maybe a little drizzly in spots near the coast. And we also still have breezy conditions out there. Through the afternoon, highs today in the lower 40s, low to mid 40s. As we go inland, a little bit warmer, but not much. The north winds are going to keep those temperatures down. You can see from the satellite and the radar images, the wet weather, the precip is out and offshore. That's the heavier stuff. That low has been tracking along, and it is now pulling farther offshore. So those winds are going to fall off, those wind speeds, later this afternoon. But it's still very breezy near the coast. Now, the skies are still mostly cloudy. And Eugene, I want to show you the futurecast because I think we're going to see some clearing. Look at that. By late afternoon, we should see more sunshine. Again, temperatures staying cool today, but clearing overnight, mainly clear. And then tomorrow, I think we're going to see mostly sunny skies. Excited about what will be a beautiful day. Highs in the mid to upper 50s near the coast, upper 50s to near 60 inland. Some more clouds back in the picture as we get into Wednesday, but highs Wednesday into the upper 60s, flirting with 70 degrees. So really warm as we go along. Chance for a few showers late Wednesday night into early Thursday. What do you think, Eugene? You happy with that?
It's not bad.
Not bad?
I'll say this. I will take anything over what we had a few weeks ago, to be honest with you.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, we had the deep freeze and the super cold conditions. The north winds are still a little gusty. We just had a gust of 29 miles per hour there in Norfolk. You can see, extreme close up there. Let's pull back over. There we go. You can see some of the other areas. A gust of 31 down at Duck, down at Manio. A gust of 36 there at Oceana. So in Virginia Beach, still a little windy out there. As we move forward, the clouds that are out there are going to thin out, and we will see some more sunshine late afternoon. Currently, sustained winds 16 miles per hour. As you look, The highs this afternoon, low to mid 40s near the coast, upper 40s inland. That's across the south side. For the eastern shore, low 40s, mid 40s for Hampton and Newport News, 47 at Williamsburg, 48 around Hertford, Edenton, close to 50. Low 40s at the Outer Banks, and 46 for Elizabeth City. Overnight tonight, lows down around 33 degrees, variably cloudy. That's seasonably chilly. I mean, it's still winter. You expect to be chilly. Tomorrow, mostly sunny, 58, and the warmer weather builds for Wednesday. Thursday, 60. Chances for showers maybe overnight Wednesday night into early Thursday, but then another round of wet weather later Thursday, scattered on Friday. An isolated shower still possible Saturday into Sunday. So there you go, Eugene. A little bit warmer. It will get colder again next Monday and Tuesday, but warmer after that. So excited about that.
You know, it's good to get to this place, right? You were asking me if I was good with it, and I obviously am better than I was a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I had asked you, I think, last week, maybe it was you or maybe it was Hunter. It may not have been you. It may have been Hunter. And my curiosity was, are we getting to that point where the season is going to break, where we can expect these temperatures more consistently? And I think, it was Hunter. He said, well, just remember there could be a potential at some point where we see another dip before we get into, later on in the later months.
So traditionally here in Hampton Roads,
break it down for
we
me.
usually get hit with another
That's
cold
what it's like a
blast.
second one,
There's like a threat of snow almost annually.
Yeah.
Sometime, usually it's in early March or sometimes late February, but there's normally one good one, so you can't say we're out of the woods altogether. But I will say, as you look at the normal high at 54, there was a time when it was much colder. It was in the upper 40s. We are trending up. We are getting warmer and warmer. We've turned the corner on the climatological coldest part of winter, and we are starting to trend up. So give it another couple weeks, we'll start seeing more days and stretches with days in the 60s and eventually the 70s, and then we'll be talking about when we're going to turn down the heat.
Listen, that means you have a little while longer to get in the gym now, all
Right.
right? Put
So we're
down
on the
those
beach
honey
behind.
buns. Get it together. Craig's been working. I know I've been working.
I haven't been
gotta
working
get it
enough.
together.
Eugene looks great. I was telling him we need to find the filter to clean up the face here, but no, it's a great time here. I always find, and Sarah, you can let me know if you feel otherwise, but for me, and I've never had seasonal affective disorder, which is a thing. Some people really get the blues with the shortened days and, the cold winters. I've never really been susceptible to that personally. But the winters here in Hampton Roads, when you've got this beautiful Chesapeake Bay and this gorgeous ocean front and all these great things to do, the sounds, you want to get out and enjoy it. And when it's cold and your days are short because of the longer nights, it does make it tough this time of year. It's like, we're almost there, folks. We just got to hang in a little bit longer. We'll be able to start taking those nice strolls along the beach and enjoying all the beautiful things here in Hampton Roads.
Cannot wait. I'm visualizing it as we speak. All right, Craig, we appreciate you, man. Thank you. And, just to me, that's good news, right? The fact that I'm looking at 50s and 60s at any point in my near future, I'm cool with that. Rain or shine, I'm good.
We'll take it. We'll take it. And again, those longer stretches of warmer weather will start. We'll start stacking them. As they say, you got to stack good plays in football. You got to stack wins, right?
Yeah.
Now we got to stack some warmer days, start getting them coming. Hang in there. We'll get there.
All right, Craig. Appreciate you. Thank you. Remember, you can always catch Craig on the weather desk right after daybreak on 13 News Now Plus. That's from 9 until 9:30, Monday through Friday. It's a great show. Him and Sarah actually work through that together, bringing you well beyond just the forecast. I mean, you guys dive into the science of it all across the
amazing.
country.
Yeah,
It's great.
She pulls stories from all around the
cool.
world and space stories. I mean, we got like the new Starlink launches this morning.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. Yeah, good stuff.
So check that out, 13 News Now Plus, 9 to 9:30 on weekdays. We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, there is a trial that has now started in Georgia. If you remember, there was a teenager who shot and killed multiple teachers and students in Georgia back in 2024. Well, the child's father is currently facing several counts in that case. It is a situation that many people have their eyes on for what it could mean for future cases like this. We'll be right back. Give us about 2 minutes here on Live Impact News. Okay, thank you for staying with us here for Live Impact News. Right now, we are the opening statements are beginning in a trial that's out of Georgia. This is for Colin Gray. He's the father of Colt Gray, that 14-year-old boy who shot and killed 2 teachers and 2 students at Appalachia High School back in September of 2024. Now, Colin Gray faces about 29 counts, including 2 counts of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. This is a very interesting case because it is one of several across the country in which the parents have been held responsible for the actions of their children, particularly in these deadly school shootings. Now, the father is accused of giving his son access to a gun and ammunition after prosecutors believe he had already received warning that his son would harm and endanger the life of others. Prosecutors say that Colin gave Colt the gun as a Christmas gift before that shooting. And the judge in this case, to let you know, this is taking place in Winder, Georgia. The judge did grant a change of venue request by the defense, but this trial is still happening in the area where the shooting happened, but the jurors are coming in from nearby Hall County. They were selected just last week. So right now we're going to take you inside the courtroom for this trial of Colin Gray in Georgia.
He actually calls the police. 23, just a few weeks after being in Fitzgerald, Colt comes back up here to Winder to live with the defendant. But he does not attend school. 2 weeks later, on October 13th, down in Fitzgerald, Marcy, who you remember is still being checked on by DFACS, tests positive for drugs. She's going to lose the kids. DFACS worker Tamika Mitchum, who's been monitoring Marcy, calls the defendant, tells him to come down to Fitzgerald to pick up the other 2 kids, Jenny and Coley, and bring them back up. He now has sole custody of the 3 kids. Marcy's to have no unsupervised contact. But Tamika Mitchum also stresses to the defendant to get the kids in school and counseling as soon as possible. He does neither of these things. 3 weeks after the kids are brought up here, on November 6th, 2023, back down in Fitzgerald, Marcy basically goes crazy. She wants to come up to Winder. She wants her mother, Deborah Polhamus, to bring her to Winder. And Deborah Polhamus says, "You ain't going to Winder." So Marcy duct tapes her mother to the chair, steals her car, drives up to Winder, goes to the defendant's house, keys his truck, and gets arrested. She spends some time in the Barrow County Jail before she's transferred to the Ben Hill County Jail for the charges down there. And while she's down there, she's released on bond to an inpatient drug treatment facility in South Georgia. She has no supervision during this time over Colt. Now, back up here in Barrow County, it's been a chaotic few months for Colt. But that Christmas, after the cuttings and the things with the Jackson County and the moms going crazy, testing positive drugs, that Christmas, the defendant, 7 months after he was told by Jackson County Sheriff's Office of possible school shooter threats and being asked to restrict Colt's access to guns, the defendant buys and gives 13-year-old Colt that Sig Sauer M400 as his Christmas present. And he allows Colt to keep this rifle propped up in Colt's room. Now, in February of 2024, 2 months after this Christmas, in February, Colt's siblings, Jenny and Coley, are finally enrolled in school. They've already missed 4 months of school, but they're finally enrolled. Colt does not attend. He misses the entirety of his 8th grade year. But during that spring, when Colt's not in school, the defendant continues to buy accessories for his Christmas present rifle. He buys a Sightmark Ultra Shot sight to go on the rifle. He buys a bungee sling to go for the rifle. He buys an accessory rail set. He buys a 45-degree offset iron sights. And he buys a lot of ammunition. That summer, 2024, Colt is now 14. It's just a few months before he takes his Christmas present rifle into Appalachian High School. July 6th of that summer, Marcy gets out of rehab in Fitzgerald, and the defendant picks her up and brings her back up to Winder. It's her first contact with Colt in 9 months. Now, Colt, who had always been quick to violence and suffered from severe anxiety, begins to spiral out of control. He's fighting with his father. He's throwing things at people. He's putting holes in his sister Jenny's door. But the rifle stays in his room. On July 20th, Colt has a panic attack at the house. He comes in the living room and he actually asks his parents to call 911 for him. But they don't call anyone. His mental health becomes so bad that the defendant and Marcy together begin giving Colt Marcy's prescription for Zoloft. They're just giving it to him themselves. They worry he's suffering from depression, but they don't take him to see a doctor. It's around this time that Colt puts those pictures of Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, up in his room. And the rifle stays in his room. August 14th, 2024, 3 weeks before the shooting. It's Colt's first day of Appalachia. School had started 2 weeks earlier, but this was Colt's first day. He missed the first 2 weeks. He had not been inside of school for 15 months. Not since the sheriff's office came to his door about the threats to shoot up a school. And that morning, Colt again is spiraling out of control. He sends a text message to the defendant at 6:49 a.m. He writes, "I'm sick of your shit. This is the fucking end for you. You fucking caused this." 2 minutes later, at 6:51 a.m., he sends this text message to the defendant. Whenever something happens,
Good time for us to remind our viewers who are joining us right now via live stream that this is live and we're taking this live, and you will occasionally potentially hear language that you normally wouldn't hear over a broadcast here on the stream. We will try our best in our abilities to try to keep those from going over, but we can't always. Just want to make sure that I gave that little disclosure here at the moment. So we'll get back to it. Now, again, this is live from inside that trial happening in Georgia in the case of Colin Gray.
she then asked the defendant to please take Colt's rifle and lock it up. He never does. Marcy then has had enough. She goes back to Fitzgerald, once again leaving Colt into the care of the defendant. And the rifle stays in his room. The next day, after this altercation with his mother, Colt asked the defendant to get him 150 rounds of ammunition. The defendant responds to him, well, he needs to pay for everything first, but he will. He will. Now, Marcy's down in Fitzgerald, the defendant's up here, but they're still communicating with each other by phone and text. And they begin to worry that Colt needs to be institutionalized. He needs to go to an inpatient facility. He's so bad. They search for places and resources, but the defendant never follows through. He never takes Colt to see any professional, and the rifle stays in his room. August 26th, 9 days before the shooting, Colt has another panic attack, this time at school. It's the one I referred to earlier in the opening. It's only his 4th day he attended school. Remember, he missed the first 2 weeks of school, and he skipped school 5 of the next 8 days. Colt leaves his second period class that day. He goes to the counselor's office. He's too distressed to go back to class. They call his father, but his father can't come to get Colt. Colt ends up spending the entire school day in the counselor's office. That night, on the phone, Colt asked his grandmother, Deborah Polhamus, if he did something terrible, would she still love him? This bothered her so much, Deborah Polhamus, that the next morning she drives up to Winder from Fitzgerald. And on the way, she calls Advantage Behavioral Health Systems. It's a crisis stabilization inpatient place in Athens, Georgia. She talks to them on the phone, and they tell her he must be brought in by a parent. Marcy's in Fitzgerald. The defendant is here. They tell her that Saturday is a great day to come in because most people don't realize they're actually open on Saturdays, and you can just walk right in. But he needs to be brought by a parent. Deborah asked the defendant to take Colt on that Saturday, which would have been August 31st. He doesn't. Wednesday, August the 28th, Colt skips school. This is 2 days after that panic attack, the day after Deborah Polhamus is called Crisis Advantage Behavioral. Colt tells the defendant that he hears voices telling him what to do. This is 3 days before the defendant is supposed to take Colt to Advantage Behavioral. and 1 week before the shooting. At 7:44 a.m. that morning, Colt texts the defendant, "I have to kind of dance around the inconvenient truth at times. I have no control over what these things say and tell me to do." And the rifle stays in his room. Colt skips school again the next day, which is a Thursday. That Friday and Monday, school is closed for the Labor Day holiday. And that Tuesday, September 3rd, Colt skips school again. That brings us back around to that Wednesday morning, September 4th, 2024. Those pictures of Nicholas Cruz are still on his wall, and that rifle is still in his room. The defendant leaves to take little Coley to school. Jenny leaves on her bus for Heyman Morris Middle School, which again is directly next door to Appalachian High School. Colt gets his rifle, gets extra magazines, puts them in his book bag. He wraps a poster board around the part of the rifle that sticks out of the bag, and he takes a hat with a Fender guitar logo on it, a stocking hat, and puts it over the top so you can't see it. And then he heads out to meet the bus. A few hours later, just like he'd been warning he was going to do, Colt murders 4 people. Now, after the shooting, which I will remind you happened at 10:22 a.m., so after that, at 11:01 a.m., Jenny, the daughter, texts her father, "3 people are dead at the high school." The defendant texts back a minute later, "How do you know? How do you know?" She responds, "People are saying, and there was an email. Please, I'm scared." She then texts the defendant, "I can't call you. I'm in a lockdown." At 12:19, the defendant texts Jenny, "Jenny, have you talked to your brother?" Jenny replies, "No. But I think we're thinking the same thing, and I don't want to talk about it over text." 1 minute later, the defendant replies, "Yep, 10-4. I'll be here in just a few. Let me know when you get back in the building and when I can come get you." A few minutes later, the defendant arrives at his home, not Jenny's school, not Appalachia. He goes home, and he runs straight to Colt's room. He has to confirm what he already knows. He goes straight to Colt's room to see if that gun is missing. And it is. Moments later, Anthony Townsend and Brandon Bazinet arrive at his house, and he utters those words, "I knew it." Now, ladies and gentlemen, the charges in this case, it's the same acts that he did. The charges are divided up between whether or not the victim of those acts was a child or an adult. If they're a child, the charges that stem from their victimization would be cruelty to children, because you have to be under 18 for cruelty to children to apply. But through his negligence of allowing Colt to have this gun, knowing what Colt was going to do, he caused cruel and excessive physical pain to the children. That's cruelty to children in the second degree. If that cruelty to children in the second degree results in death, like with Mason Skirmerhorn and Christian Angulo, that is murder in the second degree. So the cruelty and the murder in the second go together. They apply to the children. The 2 adult deceased, Christina Irmy and Richard Aspinwall, they're above the age of 18. The defendant is charged with reckless conduct same act, recklessly allowing his child, that he knew this was going to happen, to harm someone else. And because they died during the commission of reckless conduct, that is involuntary manslaughter. So for the adults, it's involuntary manslaughter based on reckless conduct. All the other children who were either struck by a bullet or in that Ryan Edwards classroom when the bullet started flying, they're the victims of charges for cruelty to children in the second degree, either by the physical pain it caused or the emotional anguish it caused. And the adults that were injured or put in harm's way, David Phoenix, Stephen Edwards, and Cassandra Ryan. Got that one. Cassandra Ryan, excuse me. Those three adults, they're the victims of the reckless conduct. Now, at the end of the case, we'll come back before you and ask you to render a verdict of guilty. Thank you.
Mr. Hobbs, thank you, Judge. Good morning, ladies.
Thank you for sticking with us here. Again, you're watching the trial there of a father. These are the opening statements that from the prosecution of a father who has now been charged in the case of his son who killed 4 people in a shooting in Georgia in 2024. We do need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll listen to the defense and what they are having to say in the case of Colin Gray. Welcome back here to Live Impact News. Let's head back to Georgia, where the opening statements now by the defense in the trial against Colin Gray, the father of the 14-year-old boy who shot and killed 2 teachers and 2 students at a Georgia high school in 2024, is currently underway.
Especially from his father. The evidence will show a father who did not ignore his child. He did not abandon his child. He did not turn his back on his child. The evidence will show between Colin Gray and Colt Gray daily contact, daily effort, and active steps by Colin Gray to seek mental health intervention for his son through the school. The evidence will show that the most important facts, the planning of this shooting, the concealment of this shooting, and the timeline of this shooting were hidden by Colt Gray from his father. That's the difference between tragedy and criminal liability. And this case is about whether the state can prove criminal liability by showing that Colin Gray knew that Colt was going to do this, knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. You cannot hold someone criminally responsible for failing to predict what was intentionally hidden from them. You'll learn about Colt Gray's state of mind that at the time no one knew. You will learn that months before the shooting, Colt had notes hidden on his cell phone from April of 2024, private notes that appear to be the planning stages of this shooting. Those notes were not known to Colin Gray. Those notes were not shared with Colin Gray. There is no evidence of that. You will learn something else. The plans reflected in those notes show that the shooting was initially planned for February of 2025 to coincide with the anniversary of the Parkland High School shooting committed by Nicholas Cruz. The plan reflected in those notes was that that time was going to be when the shooting happened, not in September of 2024. Something changed. The evidence will suggest and support that Colt accelerated his plan. And there's evidence suggesting that that acceleration was tied to the fact that Colin Gray was actively seeking mental health treatment for his son through the school at that time. There are emails to the counselor. There was paperwork he filled out. There was already in motion, already in place, an appointment for Colt to meet with the counselor and to meet with the mental health specialist the very next day, September 5th. Colin Gray did not know about the plans. Colin Gray did not know that Colt was planning to do this and that he would in fact go harm someone else. The behavior that Colt exhibits, the behavior that you'll find from his notes in his cell phone, from his text messages, show that he was actively keeping this information from others, from law enforcement, from DFACs, from counselors, from professionals who know to look for these signs, and most especially from his dad. The state will point, and they've already mentioned to you, an incident in May of 2023 when two Jackson County sheriffs went to Mr. Gray's home to talk to Colt. Fortunately, this interaction is on body-worn camera video, so you'll get to see the whole episode. You will see that Colin Gray is cooperative. You'll see that he brings his son out. He tells the officers that he takes this kind of thing seriously. He tells the officers, you tell me that he did it and those guns are gone today. That is on video. That is undeniable. But the officers don't tell him that. The officers say that they're not sure that it was him that made the threat. He tells the officers that he has a gun in the home. He says that he has a son who is somewhat isolated, who's on the computer a lot. He says that when he was young, he used to enjoy hunting with his father, that they would go deer hunting. And so he was introducing Colt to deer hunting, that they had gone out a year before. Colt had killed his first deer, that the gun that they had was for deer hunting. The gun was to get him outside, which the officer in the video approves of. Get him away from the computers, that's good. But Colin tells the officers, if you think this is him, tell me, because those guns are gone today. And that is not what he's told. It shows that Colin, had he known, would have removed those guns. But he didn't. Let's talk about what Colin actually did, because this case is being framed as if Colin Gray didn't do anything. The evidence will show the opposite. You will hear that when the family transitioned schools, it was Colin Gray who registered Colt. You will hear that Colin Gray worked full-time, was raising 3 kids on his own due to the kids' mother's addiction problems, due to DFAC saying that she was not allowed to have unsupervised contact with him, due to the courts in Barrow County saying she was not even allowed in the same county where these kids lived. Colin was doing everything. Colin is the one that filled out the counseling referral forms. Colin is the one that communicated with the school counselor. Colin's the one who discussed the evaluation. Colin was the one who was coordinating mental health services through the school. Colin is the one that filled out the paperwork to get the assessment done on September the 5th. You'll hear that the school had arranged, and it had already been taken care of, that Colin had completed everything he needed to for the assessment. You're going to hear from the grandmother who says that they wanted to take him to Advantage Behavioral in Athens, that it was urgent. This comes out after the shooting. The grandmother will also tell you she had absolutely no idea that Colt had any interest in Nicholas Cruz or school shootings in general until after the shooting happened and they were making the 4.5-hour trip from Fitzgerald, her and her daughter Marcy, at which point Marcy said, well, Colt does like this school shooter named Nicholas Cruz. That's the first time that you hear Debbie learns any of that. You're going to see text messages from Debbie in August and September of 2024 when she says that they were so strongly trying to get him into a facility. What you're not going to see in those text messages is any urgency on Debbie's part. You're not going to see anything from Debbie saying, get the guns out of the house. You're not going to say anything from Debbie saying, I'm worried about Colt. We need to get him there today. Nothing. They don't talk about it at all. Debbie doesn't mention it one bit. Now, she mentions it in hindsight after the fact, and Marcy does the same thing. Who is Colin Gray? He's a working father raising 3 kids by himself. He had responsibilities. He had a job. He had a family to keep afloat. He had 2 other kids besides Colt. He was involved. You'll see his text messages to his children. You'll see his text messages to Colt. This is not a parent who's turning his back on what's going on right in front of him. Let's talk about what you're not going to hear. Because sometimes what you don't hear in a case like this is just important as what you do. Sometimes the absence of evidence tells you more than the evidence itself. You will not hear a text message where Colt says to his dad, I'm going to shoot a school. I'm bringing a gun tomorrow. I have a plan. I'm going to hurt someone. You won't see a single message like that. You will not hear that Colt ever told his father about the notes on his iPhone. You will not hear that Colt ever showed his father a plan. You will not hear that Colt told his father he was accelerating the plan. You will not hear that anyone called Colin Gray and said, your son is about to commit a shooting. You will not hear that law enforcement told him, your son made a credible threat. You will not hear a school official warn him his mental health treatment is imminent. He needs to see someone today. You will not hear anyone from DFACS told him, we have serious concerns that he's violent, that he's going to hurt someone else. You will not hear anyone say that they contacted the police on September 3rd and said there's a school shooting about to happen. You will not hear that Colin Gray encouraged violence. You will not hear that he glorified violence. You will not hear that he dismissed a specific credible threat. In fact, you'll hear something entirely different. You'll hear that Colt suffered from anxiety. You'll hear that Colt suffered from depression. You'll hear about his panic attacks. You'll hear that he didn't like going to school. These are serious issues, but these are not the same as homicidal ideations. These are not the same as suicidal ideations. These are not the same thing as proof of a probable school shooting. The state will ask you to connect dots after the fact using hindsight. Dots that became visible only after the shooting itself. But what you will not hear is evidence that at the time, Colin had sufficient warning that this outcome was probable. Not imaginable, not possible, but probable. That Colin knew that his son would harm someone else. You'll hear testimony from Colt Gray's counselor. And that's important because it gives you a professional's perspective on what was going on with Colt in the weeks leading up to the shooting. You will hear that Colt presented as a student suffering from anxiety, and emotional instability, panic symptoms, and inability to function in class. And you'll hear something very important. You will hear that even the school counselor, a professional trained, did not perceive Colt as a threat. She described him as nice, respectful. That matters, because if a trained counselor did not perceive the imminent violence, then it's unreasonable to claim that the father should have seen it himself. You'll also hear testimony from her about how the father did in fact take steps to get him mental health treatment. The father was in communication with the counselor. The father submitted the paperwork. The father completed the referral, and the father was pursuing intervention. You'll hear the therapist was essentially scheduled to meet with Colt the very next day. The father was not ignoring the problem. Colin Gray was acting. They want you to hold him responsible because they don't think he was acting fast enough. You'll hear from his daughter, Colt's sister, Jenny Gray. Her testimony will corroborate the concealment that Colt was perpetrating on his family, on his dad. She'll testify that Colt was secretive, that he was constantly deleting and opening new accounts on Discord to avoid detection, that he was using usernames that were combinations of alphanumeric combinations. You'll find that he would not discuss, based on the statement that Jenny gave on September 4th of 2024, that he would not discuss school shootings or school shooters in front of his father. You will hear on the morning of the shooting, Colin Gray had already left home. You will hear that Colt, when he did discuss school shooters with Jenny, made her promise not to tell his dad. You'll hear that morning on September the 4th, Colin Gray got up and took his youngest son, Coley Jr., to school, that he left before Jenny and Colt did to catch the bus. You will hear that Colt had to go and find the gun because it wasn't in his room, that he had to find the ammunition that wasn't in his room, and that he had to put them in his backpack, and that he had to conceal the rifle that stuck out of his backpack 18 to 24 inches with a poster board. And he put a hat on top of it. It proves concealment, it proves independent action, and that matters because it's consistent with what Colt had done the whole time, which was conceal this plan from his father. Remember, the state says that he knew. They said that he knew this was going to happen. That he knew, not that it was possible, that he knew Colt was going to go and harm someone else. But you can't consciously disregard a risk that you're not aware of. And you can't say something is probable when it's being hidden from you. You're going to see text message. They've already discussed some of the messages. We're going to discuss some of the other ones. We're going to talk about why they matter. There are hundreds of text messages between Colin Gray and his son. These texts matter because they show the reality in real time of what was happening and what Colin would have thought and what Colin would have known at that time. Not now, but at that time. They also show what Colt chose not to disclose. You'll see a father checking on his son on a daily basis, checking on school attendance. Did you make it to school? How's your day going? How was your day? What are you doing after class? You'll see encouragement. I'm proud of you. I love you. You're a good young man. This is not an absent father. This is not a father not paying attention to his child. You'll see daily involvement. You'll see a father trying to keep a teenager engaged and connected to school. You'll see a father trying to build the confidence and self-esteem of his son. You will see this all in the text messages. You'll see their discussions about mental health, about depression, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, which is not homicidal ideation, about anxiety, panic attacks, which are not homicidal ideation. You'll see a father trying to stabilize a situation at home. You will not see threats to harm other folks. You will not see threats to harm other people. You will not see, I'm going to shoot up the school, I'm bringing a gun, I have a plan, I'm going to harm someone. There needs to be proof that Colin Gray knew what Colt was going to do and knew that Colt was going to harm someone. The text messages show something else as well. They show that Colt was capable of living a double life. He could text his father, love you, and have a good day, while simultaneously writing plans on his phone about shooting up the school. He could talk about liking school. School was good. The kids here are mature, referring to the Appalachia High School. They gave me a nickname. The teacher said I'm the tech guy. And you'll see Colin respond happily that his son seems to be finding his way for the first time in a while in school. He could talk, Colt, about school being good, about having a good day, and what they're going to have for dinner, while also planning on how to sneak a rifle into the school. That's not something a father can foresee. He asked about ammunition. You'll hear evidence that they went to the gun range. You'll hear evidence that he taught his son safety. You will not hear evidence that Colt requested ammunition because he was getting ready to do a school shooting. That conversation is not a threat. There's no mention of harming anyone else. There's no talk of a timeline. The state's going to ask you to interpret these ordinary messages with extraordinary hindsight. But the law does not allow hindsight convictions. Your task would determine what Colin Gray knew in the months leading up to the shooting. It requires proof of what he specifically knew at that time. You'll hear from the mother, Marcy Gray. She'll try to convince you that she warned everyone and no one listened. The evidence will show that she did not share the most important information she knew about Colt with Colin. You've already heard the relationship was not smooth. You heard that DFACS took the kids from her. You'll hear that they were separated. You'll hear that the kids had to come up here per the DFACS order. You'll hear that she drove up here after telling her mother she was going to murder Colin. Came up here, keyed his cars, got arrested, and then was told by the judge, you can't come back to Barrow County. You'll see evidence in text messages between Colt and his mom. You will see in these text messages Colt telling his mom prior to the shooting that he had created a Securus online profile that he was using by making up a fake age to try and get in contact with Nikolas Cruz in prison down in Florida. He will text her that he had emailed Nikolas Cruz a couple times, and he'd even put money on his commissary. Marcy's response is to ask him where he got the money. And he tells Marcy in a text message, I told Dad it was to buy a video game on Steam. To which Marcy responds with a laughing out loud emoji. Marcy knew that he had this interest in Nikolas Cruz, but she did not share it with Colin. Immediately after this conversation, you will not see a text message from Marcy to Colin say, hey, did you know he's been emailing a mass murderer in Florida? Did you know that he put money on this mass murderer's commissary account that he told you was for a video game? She doesn't share any of that with Colin. She keeps that to herself. She does not reply immediately after to Colin or tell him, hey, this is what's going on. We got to get the guns out of the house now. No, she responds with a laughing out loud emoji. That's how serious she took it. She didn't think anything was going to happen. Remember, the evidence will show that even she, with the information that he did not have, did not believe there was an imminent threat and did not believe that Colt would harm anyone else. She didn't call law enforcement. She didn't seek an emergency mental health evaluation. And you'll hear evidence that after the shooting, her conduct is inconsistent with what she tells the police. You'll hear evidence that even after the fact, she's still trying to assist him in contacting school shooters and amplifying his profile across true crime community websites. And that matters because credibility matters and bias matters. You will see that the state is asking you to convict Colin largely based on a hindsight narrative provided by witnesses who are not credible, that did not recognize the warning signs in real time. You will hear from the victims in this case. Their testimony will be emotional. And it's important to understand what happened inside that school. But respectfully, their testimony will not establish what Colin Gray knew and didn't know. They can't tell you what was said in the home. They can't tell you what was concealed. They can't tell you what was sent in text messages. And they can't tell you what warnings were communicated to Colin Gray. We're not going to dispute the horror of what happened. We're not going to dispute that they were harmed, that they were physically harmed and mentally harmed. But that's not proof that he was negligent. That is not proof that he knew what was in Colt's heart, that he knew what Colt was planning, and that he knew that Colt was going to harm someone else. The law doesn't punish what is possible. The law does not punish what is conceivable. He is charged with knowing what would happen. He is charged with knowing his son would harm someone else. In life, almost anything is possible. It's possible that a teenager who's angry might get into a fight. It's possible that a teenager who's depressed might run away or make up excuses not to go to school. It's possible that a teenager who's anxious might break something or act out. But this is not a case about whether something bad is possible. This is a case about whether or not Colin Gray knew Colt was going to take a gun to that school and harm other people. That matters, because if the standard becomes it could have happened, then the law becomes limitless. If the standard becomes you should have imagined the worst, then every parent becomes criminally liable for what a teenager might do. But that's not the standard. The standard is proof. Proof that Colin Gray knew, that he consciously disregarded, not a vague fear, not a general worry, but a risk that made this tragedy. That he knew Colt was going to go to that school. That he knew what the counselor didn't, what the DFACS professionals who had met with Colt didn't. The state will ask you to look at the outcome and then work backward to say because this happened, it must have been foreseeable. But the law doesn't allow hindsight to substitute for evidence. That's why you're going to hear about what was actually known at that time, and most importantly, what was actually hidden from Colin Gray at that time. Because when someone conceals a plan, deceives the people around them, acts independently, the law does not allow us to pretend that the people left behind should have seen through all of it. They're going to say that common sense means you should have seen this coming. And guns are serious, and this tragedy is serious. But the law is serious too. This case is not about whether or not firearms are dangerous in the abstract. It's about whether Colin Gray, based upon what he actually knew, failed to act because he knew that his son was going to go to that school and commit these acts. In a case like this, there's a natural human instinct. When something this awful happens, we want an explanation. We want someone to blame. We want a story that makes sense so that we can take steps to make sure something like this never happens again. It's very easy and it's very human to look at the end result and believe that someone somewhere must have known. But the evidence in this case is going to show something that's deeply uncomfortable. Sometimes the truth is that the person who committed the act was hiding it. Sometimes the truth is that a family can be struggling, a child can be spiraling, and people can try to get that child mental health help. And still, something unthinkable can happen. It's not satisfying and it doesn't give anyone peace. But the criminal courtroom is not here to provide a scapegoat. It's here to provide justice. Being a juror, providing justice, that requires discipline. It requires that we do not convict someone because we're horrified. It requires that we do not convict someone because we wish they would have seen it coming. It requires that we do not convict someone because we feel like there must be some accountability somewhere. The state has chosen to put the father on trial for what the son did. And at the end of this case, you'll be asked to decide whether the state has proven, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Colin Gray knew his son would go to that school and commit these violent acts. And at the end of this trial, you will find the state cannot prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, and we will ask you to return the only verdict that the evidence can support, which is not guilty on all counts for Colin Gray. Thank you.
Okay, you just heard from the defense in the case against Colin Gray. They are defending the father of Colt Gray. That is the 14-year-old boy who, at the time in 2024, killed 2 students and 2 teachers in that shooting there in Georgia. The prosecutors, who you heard from just before, the defense attorney arguing that the father, who's been charged with 29 counts, had enough information to know that giving his son a gun, a weapon, which he did as a Christmas gift, would potentially lead to the harm of others. And you heard there from the defense, they disagree and say that they are going to make their case that the father could not have known that any of this would have taken place. So again, this case is going to be one in which a lot of people are watching, as it is the latest of these charges against parents for the actions of their children, specifically in school shootings. Here in Virginia, we have seen our own situation kind of unfold like that within the last several years. When it came to the shooting at Rich Neck Elementary School a few years ago with that 6-year-old boy who shot his first grade teacher, Abby Zwerner, his mother was convicted and sentenced for child neglect charges at the state level. She also received a conviction and sentencing at the federal level for gun charges, talking about Deja Taylor in that, convicted and sentenced in 2023 for that 2022 shooting. We have so much more here for Live Impact News. We are going to take another break here, but stick with us, because on the other side of this, we have a special guest, an expert here to talk about the latest from Virginia politics, with a Supreme Court in the state saying that that referendum on whether or not we can change or have the opportunity to change the constitutional, the congressional maps here in the Commonwealth can move forward. Stick with us in just a few minutes. We will have more here on Live Impact News. All right, thank you for staying with us here for Live Impact News. In Virginia, a big election season is coming up, and a big part of that discussion is what will happen to the congressional maps in the Commonwealth. Just last week, Supreme Court here in the state ruled that a referendum can move forward on an April 21st vote where voters will decide whether or not they will allow for the change of congressional maps that could give Democrats more seats in the U.S. House out of Virginia. This is a big story that we're continuing to follow. It has so many different implications because the Supreme Court says that it won't make a decision until after that vote takes place. So joining us now, we have political expert Leslie Coggle, who is joining us. Thank you so much for being here. This is something I know for those of us who have covered politics or covered the process, this is such an interesting scenario here. Let's start with your interpretation of the Supreme Court's ruling. Anything that stuck out to you when they put that out there that said, hey, this can move forward, but we haven't made a decision yet?
Yeah, I think as we're kind of looking at the decision they handed down, one of the things that's really clear, I think, is they're aware of the political impact of this decision. And I kind of read the way they handed it down as saying, we want to do as little as possible, at least at this point, to weigh in on one side or another as to whether or not this moves forward, right? To completely shut this thing down, which they could have done essentially by saying the referendum can't move forward. So really, I think you have the Supreme Court here being asked to decide an important case and one with very real implications, but essentially politics moving forward as they kind of play with these weighty legal issues in really practically important ways for both state level politics and national politics. So I think I get the sense that you see the Supreme Court trying to be as nonpartisan as possible, maybe in a situation in which there's no way they can do it, right? So this is just so politically kind of partisan by design.
And, I have a lot of questions, and we were talking about this as well. That the timeline of everything. So within the briefing that the Supreme Court gave out, they're not even asking for all of the finalized documents and information from both sides until after that April 21st timeframe in which the voters will be able to vote, which again gives us the understanding that a decision will take place afterwards. But Dr. Coggle, have you thought about the implications that could mean on both sides of the coin? Like, if they say ultimately no, what does that mean? If they say yes and the voters say no, there's so many different scenarios here. I'm a bit concerned of what it could mean for everybody.
Yeah, there are so many permutations to what could happen here. And I have to say, from a trust in government perspective, I just mentioned before, I think there's an element to which people want courts to be nonpartisan, right? And it would be really hard for the court not to look partisan if what happens is they come to a conclusion that's different than what the voters come to on referendum day. And they didn't ask for the first briefings in this case, I think, until the end of March. So I think that's a very clear indicator. We're going to vote on this referendum without knowing whether or not there's a constitutional legality to the referendum. There's so much here. And I also want to note, I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds and some of the politics of this and forget just the sheer importance nationally for this and the amount of money that is going to come into the state of Virginia on both sides. Because I think for both parties at a national level, they are looking at this particular referendum as something that could be make or break in terms of who keeps the House of Representatives. And if you're the kind of Republican administration in power right now, what the final 2 years of President Trump's term looks like. Because if Democrats get control in the House, you are going to see oversight and hearings into a lot of things that are going to take up a lot of oxygen.
You talked about the money. One of the groups, the main group that is now working to try to get this amendment passed, they put out immediately, in support of the decision that came down from the Supreme Court. But they had already put in $5 million, to support efforts to get this amendment done. Let's talk about, though, you kind of talked about the numbers game that we're now looking at from a national standpoint and giving some context to all of this at the moment. This is not something that's happening in a vacuum, as you said, Dr. Coggle. Obviously, this particular referendum is to whether or not we can change the congressional maps here. That would be more of a 10-1 in favor of Democrats, 10 Democrats and 1 Republican in terms of the districts that they're looking for. But we're looking at 4 new seats that Democrats think that they can get in this. But that's with Texas already changed theirs for 5. North Carolina changed theirs with 1. We have a few other states that have already done so, and then others that are looking potentially at doing it. Can I ask just your opinion of what we're seeing nationally with this kind of congressional arms race, so to speak? Have we seen anything like this before?
Yeah, so we have. In the 19th century, you saw the United States and political parties do something similar, which is these gerrymandering attempts, especially mid-cycle, to shore up power. Ultimately, what happened there is that you draw the maps in a way that seems like they benefit you and they will keep you in power indefinitely. But there's a shift in voters, and there are these kind of wave elections. And what happens is you've drawn seats that make you weaker, because you've diluted the strength in some of your strong districts to add to your weaker districts, kind of to balance things out, right, to get more seats. Those are called dummy manders. And politicians run the risk of doing them when they draw maps in this way. So you're drawing maps often based on what voters have done in the past. That makes no guarantee for the future. And we're seeing this a little bit in Texas. I think there are some questions. Texas redrew its maps. And one of the things that they considered was the fact that President Trump was pulling in more Latino support in drawing those districts. They thought they were drawing stronger Republican districts. But if the poll numbers that we're looking at now that reflect the president really dramatically losing support in that community hold, then Texas might have drawn maps that aren't as strong for Republicans as what Republicans thought they were. Right, so this has happened in the past. I have to just say, though, somebody who follows politics, I think this is a really depressing thing to look at happening. And especially in Virginia 5 years ago, the voters essentially said, we don't like these gerrymandered maps. We want the kind of one person, one vote. We want our votes to matter as much as possible when we turn out on Election Day. And for all the difficulty we've had drawing maps, the fact that a purplish state had 5, and 6 as our congressional delegation, a pretty even split, I think is pretty reflective of Virginia voters. What I dislike seeing are maps that we see in places like North Carolina and Wisconsin, where you get one party getting 60% of the vote and like 20% of the seats, right? That disjuncture because of how the maps are drawn. This isn't great for democracy. Even as you can understand the partisan implications for everybody and why they want to do this.
And why they want to do it, the numbers, right? And we know that this started with the President Trump, really kind of calling for these Republican-led states to try to change their map so that they can get a wider advantage in the U.S. House. You kind of mentioned it, what we're looking at potentially for this midterm election. If it's anything like what we saw in Virginia, what we saw in New Jersey, obviously Republicans would be concerned about that and trying to keep their control moving ahead for the second half of the president's current term. But I believe the numbers right now we have within Congress is 218 Republicans to 213. We have a few of those seats that are currently unfilled. Looking at the numbers again, to kind of be a little bit clearer, though, you kind of talked to a few of them with Texas. Texas thought that they put it together to where they would have 5, but hearing from you, we don't know yet exactly what that's going to look like. In California, they also went ahead with there's Democrats there. They changed their maps officially so where they would hopefully have another 5 there. You have Missouri with 1, Ohio with 2, those both for Republicans, North Carolina changing 1 in advantage for Republicans. So ultimately, we're going to see what happens this midterm. It is so important to look at it, but it's, to your point, Dr. Coggle, you mentioned kind of how depressing it is at this moment, right? When we're looking forward, not just here in Virginia, but beyond the next several years, What kind of precedent do you think this will set moving forward? Do you think we'll ever get back to a place where we don't look at elections the way that we currently are?
I mean, if I were to venture a guess, I think this stuff in American politics tends to work on kind of a pendulum. You go too far in one direction and you start to swing back. That's what happened in the 19th century when you had like the dummy Nanders, right? People were like, whoa, this isn't in our interest. And I would just say, to me, the kind of interesting states in this particular fight haven't necessarily been Virginia or California. I understand exactly why they're doing what they're doing. But they've been states like Indiana and Maryland, where you've clearly seen politicians say, I know the president wants this, or I know the party leader, Hakeem Jeffries, wants this, but we're not doing it because we don't think it's in our interest, either from an ethical perspective or from a purely kind of partisan political perspective. These, representatives understand that they are putting their seats at risk when they try to redraw these boundaries in ways that kind of divvy up voters from how they are currently organized. So I think we'll probably see a step back from this, but this isn't a great precedent, and it doesn't, make you feel really good about politics, particularly because I think it's hard for me to imagine when President Trump told Texas to redraw the map that he or somebody around him wasn't like, wait a minute, what is to keep other states from doing this? And once other states do this, it is not clear to me that the Republican Party has the advantage that they think they had. So I'm not sure what the point was in doing this. I don't know that after all of this happens and people start to feel even worse about politics, this is going to do anything to blunt what's likely to be an election that, Democrats do well in, just because historically, if you take away everything that's happening in terms of current events, the out party does better in midterm elections, and we have a pretty closely divided House. They were likely going to lose it anyway. I don't think this changes anything.
Now, just for clarity, the current way in which this referendum is constructed in Virginia, it is to be considered as temporary, right, for this, and also, and correct me if I'm wrong, triggered in certain cases. Can you explain that a little bit better?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So what this referendum does is essentially says if another state does this mid-cycle kind of redrawing of the maps for partisan reasons, which, by the way, the Supreme Court in 2019 said these partisan drawing of the maps is fine, right? If somebody else does it, we can do it, but that's not going to be forever. They've essentially put a sunset on when this particular kind of amendment would time out. So feasibly, if you wanted to do this again in 10 years, you'd have to pass another amendment. And I think that really is a testament to the fact that for Democrats, I think this felt a little funny because they know how voters feel about this. Many of the people who are supporting this ballot measure also supported the anti-gerrymandering ballot measure that Virginians just passed a few years ago. So I think in Virginia, at least, you've seen attempts to say, I don't know, we're going to do this, but, we're kind of holding our nose, right? We don't like this and we feel like we're doing this for practical political purposes, but we don't want this to be the way we do stuff going forward.
Obviously this comes on the heels of a separate court, a lower court here in Virginia, saying that this was illegal. You have former Attorney General here in the Commonwealth, Jason Miyares, who has continued to push, this is illegal. We believe that it's illegal. But obviously you also have on the Democratic side, House Speaker Don Scott, when this news came out and said, hey, this is going the way that we ultimately thought it was going to go, that voters will have the final say. Something I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you thought it was interesting as well, Dr. Coggle, is that in what the Virginia Supreme Court put out, they said the lower court's ruling didn't have any effect in their interpretation on what the timeline would be. What did you I know that's maybe getting into the weeds a little bit, but I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that.
Yeah, as I was looking at this ruling, I think it was just very clear to me that I think the Supreme Court knows that they're handling like a bomb here.
Yes.
And I don't think they want to be the one holding it. And I think what you saw them do as best they could is carve out a space that said, we're going to try to deal with this really kind of interesting legal question about what Election Day means in the modern context when we don't just all vote on one day. we're going to decide that question, but we're going to pretend nothing else is going on around it. And that meant you had to kind of take out considerations about dates and the timeliness because this referendum is imminent, right? So it seemed to me like they were doing their best to be like, we're going to handle this legal question. We're going to ignore the political implications on the ground, which the lower court did not do.
Yeah, this is, I read through that and I thought that this entire thing was fascinating. Everybody was waiting to hear and to see what the Virginia Supreme Court would do. I'm not quite sure I could tell you that I would have guessed that that was the way in which they would have worded and done everything. So very interesting in how they did that. And of course, now we look forward to April to see ultimately what the voters will decide when it comes to this. There's going to be, as you said, a lot in between there, money that's going to be funneled in to try to get voters to swing one way or the other within this case. Do you expect to see anything else between now and maybe April that you think voters and everyone should kind of keep their eyes on, particularly when it comes to this fight?
I think we should all be watching what goes on in other states who are contemplating similar moves here, places like New York, because that is going to have bearing on what these Virginia maps mean overall. Again, I do think that we can't really separate out that for voters, this question is not going to be decided in a vacuum, right? Contemporary political events are going to influence how voters perceive this amendment, because what this amendment is essentially about is President Trump. Right. Passing the amendment is something that's going to weaken the president, and voting down the amendment is something that gives the president at least a better chance at maintaining the status quo. So just the environment that is around us politically is really intertwined with this map question. It's not a Virginia map question by itself.
And then you got to get people to actually vote, right? And that really becomes a big play in this when we're talking about the money that's already kind of being funneled into and talked about it. Can you get people to go on that April 21st or to vote on that April 21st deadline? And then the other deadlines, I guess we're still waiting to kind of come out here when it comes to that. Any other questions that you still have with this? You think it's like, oh man, I'm waiting to see what this does, anything that's still of interest to you when it comes to this conversation of these newly proposed congressional maps?
It's going to be really interesting to me to see how the parties address the kind of garnering support of their particular position around these maps. Just generally, I think you have Democrats in kind of a weird position because they're doing something that many of them would argue like isn't good for a political reason. I think that's a hard argument to make to people, right? That, I'm doing this thing that you probably don't like and don't want the other side to do, but I'm doing it because I have to. Republicans are on a little stronger ground, I think, in the state of Virginia, being like, hey, this isn't how we want to do things. And I do think you're going to see a lot of discussion about the distinction between rural and urban voters here, because what these are aggressive. This is an aggressive map, right? What this does is it dilutes the power of rural voters across the state. You can't get around that. So that's going to be a major talking point here, and it'll be interesting to see how it resonates and what that does for turnout in areas where turnout isn't particularly high, and noting that special elections turnout's always kind of a mystery, and the people who turn out tend to be different than turnout for like a presidential election.
I truly think it'll be a big battle to see who actually comes out to vote for this. You were talking about the cell. We're hearing from Senator Louise Lucas right after this came out. She said, listen, these are not ordinary times, and Virginia will not sit on the sidelines while it happens. We made a promise to level the playing field, and today we are keeping our promise. And she has been very loud about that consistently, and in her fashion, striking back on people on social media as well about this. Sarah, if you can you pull that map back up? And, you talked about how the impact this could have on rural people within Virginia. I want to focus here in Hampton Roads, just looking at those areas. Now, we knew going into this that the 2nd Congressional District that is currently being held by Republican Congresswoman Jen Kiggans was likely going to be one of the ones that we saw impacted by this. Big fight already taking place in that district. Kiggans wants to keep it, but already has, Elaine Luria, who formerly was in that role, fighting to get it back on the Democratic side. But looking at the other areas, the other district, and how they changed it, did anything surprise you or pique your interest as to how they looked at, particularly District 8 there, District 4 and 3? Were you surprised by any of that? And is there anything we should kind of be seeing out of how these particular districts are currently positioned?
So I think the one thing that surprised me was how aggressively they drew that second district. They pulled out a decent amount from Bobby Scott in that third district. And just to be clear, I live in Bobby Scott's district, and he's not running competitive elections when he's running for re-election, right? That was a strong district anyway. But they're really shoring up that second district. And, they're for Kiggans, I can't emphasize enough, if that map goes through, like, her electoral prospect gives him such an advantage. In pulling Democratic parts of his district out for the 2nd district, I think you're making Bobby Scott's district weaker and making it a more attractive target, likely pulling in better challengers, Republican challengers in the future, and more money in those electoral campaigns in support of better challengers. And what you're going to have there then, I think, is a person who's not really had to run in a competitive election. So I think we assume a lot when somebody's been in office a while or they're in a powerful position that they're kind of untouchable, but politicians know that they are not. And the reality is we don't know what Bobby Scott looks like in a competitive election in the contemporary environment because he's not running one. So, you know, he's making a sacrifice here in this map in terms of his political prospects moving forward. Do I think it's likely that he loses the next election? No. Do I think it's more possible with this new map than it would be currently? Yes, most definitely.
And just real quick here, because we only have a few moments, I would have asked you this much earlier, but Bobby Scott is one of many lawmakers who are still trying to figure out how they can end this partial government shutdown that is currently taking place because they cannot agree to funding for the Department of Homeland Security. How do you see this playing out? Obviously, it's very different than what happened last year. Seems like the urgency isn't there as much, though, for this one.
Yeah, I think that's the case. What they're essentially shutting down is about 15% of the government, and it's part of the government that's going to have to come to work anyway without pay. So the first thing I want to say there is that's a really terrible situation, to be working for TSA or something and not getting paid. But I do think what that means for most Americans is you seeing the government shut down, those sorts of harms are mitigated, at least at first. What I wonder is, as you have this last a little bit longer, as you get into maybe March and April when people start going on vacations and taking spring breaks, if this becomes more visible to Americans, and then you start to see a little bit more pressure. But to me, if you look at the negotiations going on between both parties, I mean, they're pretty far away in terms of their particular demands, and they don't seem to be behaving with any sense of urgency. So you feel really bad for people who are working for TSA or the Coast Guard or any of these other kind of parts of the government where they're showing up and they're doing their jobs, and their jobs are incredibly important to us as citizens, but they're not getting the pay. They're not getting the support because, you know, apparently this is how we do politics now, right? We shut down the government when there's a political issue.
Certainly does appear that that is the case. Dr. Leslie Coggle, thank you so much. And also for your patience, too, as we're working through everything and as always to provide your insight on these very important topics. We know we're going to be talking to you again as we get closer and closer to these referendums that are going to be taking place. But right now, that's all the time we have here for Live Impact News. Thank you so much for joining us. If you watched us on YouTube, remember, you can always download the app on 13 News Now. Plus, you can get that on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. Up next, we have 13 News Now at noon, and then Live Impact News will be back again from 1 until 3. Have a good rest of your afternoon.